Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How is everyone doing? Feeling a little rise of Hitlery here in America right now. Really feel like history books are now just like a checklist. Yeah, this happened. All right. Biden's kind of Hindenburg-y. Okay. Feels good. All right, let's not dwell on this, though. I mean, look, hey, in your personal lives, yes, dwell, do what you can, donate to bail funds for the students that have been arrested. But I'd like to concentrate here, have a little bit of respite, because today's a great episode. This is Ben Chasny. If you don't know who Ben is, I hope I'm saying his name right. I tried to look up other interviews with him, and no one said his name in them, the ones that I went to. But if you don't know who Ben is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Born in Los Angeles, musician Ben Chasney's family moved to rural Northern California when he was young. His recording debut was a heavy free rock project named Plague Lounge, very 2020. Whose album The Wicker Image was released conjointly between the New World of Sound and Holy Mountain labels in 1996. Holy Mountain released many of Ben's albums as 6 Organs of Admittance as well, starting with his first self-titled album in 1998. Since then, he's released just about 3 dozen albums and EPs as 6 Organs. Ben also plays in the wonderful psych/noise rock band Comets on Fire, who have 4 albums on labels like Alternative Tentacles and Sub Pop. And Ben's latest album as 6 Organs of Admittance, Time is Glass, was released at the end of April on Drag City. And folks, it's fantastic. This is wonderful. I've been a fan of Ben's music for decades now. And not only does he have an interesting childhood, but I think a good portion of this episode is us kind of talking philosophically about music, about his attitudes around music, and around, let's say, his opposition to certain kinds of, I know this is vague what I'm saying, I just don't want to spoil the episode, his opposition to certain kinds of stereotypical views of the role music plays in our lives and why he wants to get away from that stereotypical view of music. It's very cool, interesting. I like talking about rural Northern California, which is utterly different from here where I live, Los Angeles, which really feels to me just like a bunch of suburbs kind of Frankenstein together, and where Ben grew up in Northern California seems incredibly alien. But yeah, what a good dude. I hope you like this episode. It was a blast to talk to Ben. And folks, if you did like this episode and you are new to Beginnings, what I like to do here in the beginning is a little recommended if you like. Now, I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of artists and writers and musicians and actors and comedians and so on and so forth over the last 14 plus years. Dig into the back catalog at will if you want, but how about this? I'll just give you a couple suggestions if you're new to the show. If you like my talk with Ben's a musician, maybe you'll like my talk with other musicians that are in somewhere in the same quadrant as Ben. I've talked to Terry Riley, mentioned in this episode, Terry Riley and David Harrington of Kronos Quartet. I've talked to them. Raphael Terral, Oren Mbarchi, those were recent episodes that were really wonderful. Check out those episodes. Subscribe to the show if you like it. Leave a review if you have 10 seconds. At least click on 5 stars. You can find me on social media at Andy Beckerman if you want to wade into the living hell that is social media in 2024. Coming up on the show, 2 great talks. One about Eric Early of Blitzen Trapper. Really interesting stuff. And Marina Allen, cool newer musician. Her 3rd album's just coming out, and she was really thoughtful. So stay tuned for those, but for now, let's talk to Ben. Do you have any questions?
No, not at all. No, sounds like fun.
About the sometimes, sometimes, Well, I don't know. It's tough. It's tough doing anything. Well, I don't know. I was about to say it's tough doing anything creative in dystopia, as like the jaws of dystopia clench around us. And then I'm like, well, it's not that tough, but it is. It's tough. It's more tough just watching it happen.
It's hard. It's hard to kind of keep creative as you see things dissolve around you.
Yes, but it's not that, like, the creative stuff doesn't turn off. It's just that, I don't know about you, but like, it's more like I don't have the energy I once had as I'm watching the jaws clench around people. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I mean, you have to use, because the way that contextualizes what you do in itself, it makes you think, so your impetus for creation isn't changed, but when you think about the importance of what you're doing in the world, as the world's getting, well, the world's always been fucked up, but as you see so blatantly, I mean, that's how it is for me, kind of questioning.
Is it the importance? Okay, I asked this because I still think it's important in a way that, I mean, if I do a comedy podcast or something like that, I don't think it's capital I important, but it gives someone a little bit of distraction. Like, you can't be, I've been saying this, I'm like, I can't mainline tragedy 24/7. I do need respite from that. So I do think there is some importance, and I would say for you more, maybe, as a musician who I think creates important works of art. Like, I think there is something deeper.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. But I have to say, I think artists are different because you'll have artists who will think they're important no matter what, and you'll have artists who will have a hard time finding importance in their own work no matter what. And you can see that out in the world. You see the people who, no matter what happens, they think, well, I'm fucking rad. I don't know what you're doing. I'm fucking rad. And then you have other people where you just takes one tiny little bit and they think, oh, that's it. I'm done. You know what I mean? Like, why am I even doing it? Like, it only takes the slightest bit of criticism for them to, for it to already sort of underline their ideas in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. I see, because my version of it is that I've created a hierarchy. And in this hierarchy, high art, even though I know there's no real distinctions, but I still have this thing in my head that says there are certain things that are high art, and those are capital I important and capital M meaningful. And then the little goofs that I do are capital N nonsense. Do you know what I mean? And so the self-deprecation or the confidence doesn't even factor in yet. Like, I'm at the stage in my brain where I'm like, well, there are things that are better than other things, just a priori by fiat of what they are. Like, modern composition is more important than pop music. Again, I don't really believe this, but in my head. And then there's that second thing that you are factoring in, which is just the person's ego or confidence, regardless of what they're making. That then, you could be making like the shittiest pop music that is totally inconsequential and meaningless and actually like saps meaning from the world. And yet if that person has enough power or enough ego, they can do it no matter what's going on. Like there could be jackbooted thugs marching in the streets, and they're like, "Well, I'm making something that's obviously the best." Is that? Am I getting that
a little
right?
bit? I think it's interesting that you brought up that you thought that, and I am by no means a poptimist, but it's interesting that you thought, or you just made a statement that pop music could actually sap meaning from the world. Is that really something that you really think? I mean, I'm not questioning. I don't mean now. It sounds like I just find that interesting that someone would say it could sap meaning from the world, because you've already. That's interesting.
I don't know if I have a real belief behind that, but there are sometimes I'll listen to a song that is eliciting the most basic human emotions, the most uncomplicated human emotion possible, and that I know was written in a laboratory, and that I know was written not with any kind of actual feeling behind it, but because the people writing it, and I'm talking about like the most famous pop songwriters now of our time, and I know that the people writing it wrote it in a cynical way, knowing that it would do a certain thing, or it would elicit a certain reaction in their audience, and that's the stuff that I feel And again, this is maybe the first time I've really thought about it, so I don't actually know if I back this up or not, or if I'm just saying it in the moment. But like, I do feel like sometimes that stuff doesn't reveal anything meaningful, doesn't hit in a deep way, and might actually be detrimental.
I see. How do you distinguish between that and the artist that is doing something meaningful? I mean, they're both speaking the same language of emotions, aren't they? I mean, maybe has the artist that is doing it in a more mechanical way, say, or more, on more of an assembly line sort of thing, they're using the same conventions and the same language that the other person probably has been, right? I'm just curious, because these are things that I'm curious about myself. I'm in no way trying to confront you with or get you. I'm not trying to get you at all. I'm just
no, you might as well. This was
as in gotcha.
Yeah,
but
no. Yeah, please do, because this is not something I really have interrogated.
Yeah, I'm just curious about it because I think that one of the things people always go to emotion in music, like music is supposed to be like as if the main importance with music is emotion and to convey some sort of emotion. And I feel like it's maybe something that people fall back on a little more. It's almost this like, and so the reason why I ask is to question, like, is this really something, like, do you think that that's the main thing? Do you think that music's main importance is to convey emotion?
No, that I don't think. I am an existentialist at heart, and I don't think anything human made has any specific purpose other than the purpose that is created between the person making the art and the audience and the world. And like somewhere in between that constellation, meaning comes out of it.
Yes. So that's why I go back to you saying earlier, and again, I'm not trying to do gotcha, but that's why I was curious that you said perhaps saps meaning from the world. That's why I was curious about that.
I do think that if something is created cynically, that in some way is detrimental to our emotional and existential lives. And I don't have any hard and fast. That is a gut feeling. I don't have any hard and fast evidence to back that up. If I was less sleepy, I might be able to cobble something together for you. It's just this, when I hear stuff like that, and again, why I said emotional is because I think that a lot of mainstream pop music, that is the point of it, is to elicit some kind of emotion. Or that for me, I grew up pretty repressed most of my life. And I think my primary way of engaging with my emotions was through music, or my primary way of discovering the nuances of emotion was not through actually experiencing it or talking about it with my friends or a therapist or something like that, but was having different facets of my emotional side elicited through the music I listened to.
Right. Do you think that did the music did it introduce you to new emotions?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And for things that I didn't know I had the capacity to feel because I grew up so buttoned down.
Right.
And that's why I say, but I don't think anything has a purpose. I think there's plenty of like music that is like technically cold and that elicits nothing from me, but that I love because of whatever. I don't know what I'm thinking of, but like some modern composition piece. Like I was about to say Xenakis, but I'm like, even that elicits some kind of like feeling from me. But like I don't know, let's just say it was just some noises with someone tuning a violin in the background that I might like. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if it necessarily gets me emotionally. So there's room for anything, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Did you see? I from the small number of facts I know about you, I created this picture in my head of who you were. Like when I learned that you were born in Los Angeles for some reason, I was like, oh, I know who this person is, based on nothing more than that. And because of, I think we're maybe around the same age, and I'm from the East Coast, but then I moved out here 10 years ago to do TV writing. And I started learning about what Los Angeles really was and what the spirit or the kind of existential and emotional ambient energy is in this state. And what it used to be in like the 60s and 70s. And I'm curious if that spirit inhabited you in any way. And I don't mean that in a hippy dippy kind of new agey sense. I mean literally like, did the ideas of the 60s and 70s of California get into you in any way when you were younger?
Well, probably. I mean, Los Angeles to me was sort of the other, though, because I was born in Los Angeles, but I moved out of Los Angeles when I was 2. So I was not raised in Los Angeles, but I was raised in Northern California, which is almost the opposite of Los Angeles. It's so rural here. We have a lot more in common with any rural state than we do with, major metropolis. So, but my parents grew up in Los Angeles, so I would have inherited their outlook. And actually, my father's from the East Coast. My father's from New York. So my father moved from New York to Los Angeles in high school. So he still has a bit of East Coast in him as well. So all of that combined, I definitely took on a lot of California aspects. Humboldt County, that's where I live right now, Humboldt County. This is about 6 hours north of San Francisco.
Oh,
and it's very hippie. So yeah, there's definitely a hippie vibe. I mean, it's mostly known for marijuana, which was its main, it's sort of the secret economy, mostly through the 80s and 90s.
Right.
But, there's the biggest reggae festival outside of Sunsplashes here in Humboldt County. That's sort of the world. Although growing up, I rejected that as well, so kind of fell into punk rock. So it was more sort of rural punk rock kind of upbringing, at least in high school. When I was younger than high school, then, yeah, my dad just sort of wanted to get out of the city. And I grew up as very, very rural area, not only in Humboldt County, but I lived at the end of this valley called Elk River Valley. And there's only ever one kid to play with when I was growing up anywhere near, and you had to ride your bike quite a ways even to get to the kid. So that's how I actually grew up.
What made him want to, I mean, I don't like Los Angeles that much, but what made your dad want, so I can understand wanting to go anywhere else, what made your dad want to?
He was a Vietnam vet. So he was drafted into Vietnam, served 69 to 70. And then when he got out, he stayed in Southern California for a while. And then when I was born, he didn't want me to be raised there. So he wanted to get out and go as rural as possible. And Humboldt County actually has a lot of ex-military up here. A lot of people are just trying to get away from the big city, kind of live in the country.
Did the city represent something to, when he got back? Like, did it suddenly represent something, or was it just that it was, after seeing combat, it's just like...
Yeah, people. Yeah, it represented people. Yeah, he didn't want to see any people. He was tired of people. Mm-hmm. He didn't like people. So he doesn't want to talk to anybody, sort of that sort of thing. So, he just wanted to go kind of be by himself with his family. That was mostly it. It wasn't anything cultural. Actually, if there's one thing he loved about LA, it was the culture of the radio stations. So he still kind of talks about how LA at the time had great radio stations, and it would turn him on to a lot of great music. And so in that way, LA influenced me because my father playing certain records, whether it's Neil Young or Nick Drake or Leo Kottke or whatever, growing up with that stuff, that definitely influenced me. And he got all that from LA radio. So it was mostly, he didn't want to see people face to face, but actually culturally there definitely was something in Los Angeles for him.
How did your mom react to this move?
I don't really know. I wasn't really paying attention at the time, but
Sure,
you know,
you were
they
too.
wanted to. They both wanted to get out of the city. My mom grew up in LA too, so
Anytime someone grew up here, and obviously there's a larger population than just people who are in showbiz, but I am always confounded just because I am such an East Coast person, and I'm like, why else are you here except for you have to be here for work? But there's not. There's so many other people.
yeah,
who are
it was
like,
very. Actually, I think it was way more rural. I mean, when he was growing, it was LA region, but it was Granada Hills, so it was farther away and definitely more rural when he was growing up. Not rural, but more
Right.
rural than it is now. You know,
What was your mom's family? What did they do for a living? What did your mom do for a living?
they were farmers. My mom's family are farmers from Idaho.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so I'm from pretty working class. My farmers from Idaho, and my father is an auto mechanic, and so he came up here. He actually went to school to work on aircraft. So he's licensed to work on aircraft, but when he moved up to Humboldt County, he always jokes that he found out there was one aircraft mechanic for the whole county, and he wasn't going to get that job until that guy died. So he started working on cars instead.
Interesting. So wait, did your mom's family like come over here during the Depression, the Dust Bowl, like migrate west?
Some of them stayed there, and then some of them, came. I don't know the exact date but they have some. It was quite a while ago. I have some relative from Los Angeles who was a major sports writer, actually, and he was part of the big campaign to get the Dodgers to move to Los Angeles with articles in LA newspapers. I don't know what LA newspaper it was, but he wrote for them. And he was a big part of the campaign to move them out there.
This is going to be a very strange question, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you feel this stuff in your bones? Like, do you feel like the connection between that kind of like the rural kind of yeoman farmer type American archetype? Like that is the kind of like basic, very fundamental understanding of the what it is to be an American, right? And your dad participating in, this very, I don't even know what adjective I want to use.
I should definitely say he was drafted. He was not a volunteer. So
right.
there's a very big difference also in the types of participation that happened. With
Unwillingly
that sort of thing.
participating.
Yeah.
In kind of this like very, this important flashpoint. Let's just be as neutral as possible. Flashpoint in American history. Like, do you feel that kind of stuff in your bones, or are they just facts that kind of like sit there like, yeah, I guess that's what happened with my parents?
Well, I definitely have an anti-war stance that I inherited from my father. My father's very anti-war. He burned his uniform as soon as he got out. And that's how I was raised, anti-war. So anti-aggression. That is inside of me. As far as farmer stuff, I like to garden, and I like to look at pictures of the family. I think it's cool, but I don't know how much of it's like in my bones. It's hard to tell.
Yeah. I ask that because I'm American, but I feel other all the time. I don't feel really part of this country. Like my grandparents emigrated here when immigrated. You emigrate from, you immigrate to. Immigrated here when they were kids.
Okay.
So I don't have there's the family history isn't rooted so much in America as they are in the immigrant experience. That's why I asked it, because I'm like,
did you say your grandparents?
Yeah, my grandparents.
Yeah. Well, my father's grandparents did as well from Czechoslovakia. So my grandmother was born in Slovakia. My grandfather was born here, but right after his parents had moved over. But my grandmother moved over right before World War II. And I actually got to go back on a tour once and visit the house that she was born in, on the farm and stuff. It was very cool. I feel in a way sort of more connected to that than America in a way, just because of the stories, and my grandmother still had an accent, things like that.
Oh, interesting. Did you emotionally feel something when you were there?
It was incredible. Yeah, it was absolutely incredible, especially because we went to a family graveyard, which is not something I've ever experienced. So just generations and generations going back. It really really makes you appreciate things, realizing all these people that live so you could live. It was pretty heavy. It was very cool.
Yeah. Oh, that stuff, when I encounter those things, I don't even know how to emotionally or intellectually kind of understand it, because my brain can't handle, it's very much like the Sublime. Like, I don't mean the band, I mean the philosophical concept, but like the idea of like, it's like too much. And I think it does elicit that feeling of like beauty and terror in my chest to think of time stretching out in that way, and your connection to that and all the contingencies that had to happen for you to just exist.
Yeah. It's too much to handle.
It is. So you grew up in this pretty rural area. You said like you had to bike. There was like one other person or one other like kid you could hang out with.
Yeah. Was
it one that you could hang out with, or there was only one that you cared to hang out with?
Well, if you wanted to get into the sort of politics of 9-10-year-old rural living, there was one friend, there was a fork in the road. And I had one friend, we lived on this side of the river. This is going to sound like I'm making up. There was a river, and there was a fork in the road, and you can go on one side of the river or the other. And so we were on one side of the river, and we were sort of enemies with the kids on the other side of the river. Not really, but just in the way that kids form little gangs or whatever, little rural gangs. So, you'd make mud bombs in case they came over to your side. And as you get older, the weapons get more and more dangerous, and I'm surprised I didn't lose an eye. But we never actually had a full-on combat. It was just sort of one of those things where you're kind of getting ready. So I had one friend on my side of the river, and that we hung out.
When you say, combat, were you talking just like sticks and stuff like that? Or we're talking
mostly
BB
mud
guns?
bombs. It would be in mud bombs, but maybe with some rocks packed in. I mean, it wasn't full. It wasn't like trying to kill each other. It was just territorial, and we had mud bombs. And you hoped, but there was always the fear that maybe they might throw an actual rock. But we were just kids, so it was like the threat of the rock. That was sort of like the mutually assured destruction. If everyone picked up rocks, but you didn't quite pick up rocks. Later, the weapons got more dangerous, but we stopped having those sort of like combats. We just started developing our own sort of, I know it sounds funny because I said I'm anti-war, but that's a very interesting thing when you're a kid. You don't really have those sensibilities yet. You're watching all the Rambo movies and stuff, so you haven't figured that out. So yeah, we used to make our own crossbows and ninja stars and stuff.
Yeah. It's even more interesting as an adult where I am, well, I don't know if I would say an absolute pacifist, but definitely anti-war. And yet I love TV shows like Reacher or something like that, where you have a giant man crushing someone's skull with their hand.
Right,
so, and it's interesting to hold those two things in your head at the same time, where the media you consume, well, I consume at least, I don't want to put that on you, is violent, is extremely violent. And a lot of it is violent in service of empire.
Right.
And you're watching it as entertainment with the knowledge. You're like, well, I know what this is propaganda. And I know that there was a military liaison that had to approve this script, because otherwise they wouldn't have gotten use of the military, the U.S. military stuff, because that's how that happens.
Yeah.
It is interesting. But as a kid, you don't have that nuance in your head. You're just like, yeah, Rambo, kill those Afghani folks.
Yeah. Or you're like, Krull, that was a really cool boomerang type weapon with blades on the end. I'm going to try to build that out of wood. It was sort of like that.
Yes. I was a comic book guy. So in Metal Shop, I made Gambit cards because I couldn't throw cards the way that Gambit, the X-Man, if you know what I'm talking about, throws cards. But I made metal ones.
I'm imagining it.
Yeah. And then I threw it, and I was just like, oh, this is actually dangerous. I should not throw this at another human being. Like, I'm throwing a metal playing card.
Yeah. We used to take just nails and put them in a 8 configuration where there's 8 nails sticking out, and you could just use black electric tape, start from the middle, and tape them all together, and it becomes like a throwing star. You could throw those, and they'll stick into a fence.
Oh no.
Yeah. No, our weapons got worse and worse. And then we started making crossbows out of surgical tubing, where you could make sort of a cross with wood. And if you could nail the surgical tubing down on each, and we actually had triggers based on like clothespins, and you could drill a hole and have a wire come through, and you could pull the crossbow. And we used to make our own arrows out of little thin slats that are very sharp. And then the feathery part was actually just made out of like cardstock or something like that, and you could shoot those as well.
Did someone teach you this, or was this trial and error?
It was trial and error. It was trial and error, but we figured it out, and then just with surgical tubing, and then we did. My friend's dad knew what we were doing and did not stop us, which is very surprising. I was working a little more covertly.
Was the feeling like we have to protect our territory, was that a make-believe feeling, or did you actually feel it in your
totally make-believe. No, it was just something, I don't even know where that came from. It was just some weird territorial thing. I mean, it was in the woods. And tree forts, and you could, there's also, the river was in a valley, so you could see the other hills where they were at, across this river valley. So you can kind of see their quote unquote territory, although we're all just kids and we kind of still would play every once in a while if the families like got together. So it wasn't brutal enemies. You just kind of fell into these factions.
Okay. Because I was trying to figure out if it was this is important. We have to protect our land.
No, there's nothing to protect. It was just some make-believe, make-believe factions.
Right. But you could walk out of that. What I was trying to figure out was you could walk out of that feeling if you wanted to walk out of that feeling. It wasn't something that was deeply held.
No. Yeah. It was not something deeply held at all.
Yeah. Okay. So you're having these kind of make-believe territorial battles. What else is going on in this rural area?
That's it. That's why we were having to make. I mean, there was nothing. I can't emphasize enough how little there was to do. We didn't even have cable. There's two channels on TV, and that was it. Later discovered Dungeons and Dragons, and then the make believe sort of stuff went into that, and. There wasn't a lot to do.
What kind of culture is filtering into your life then? Is it just from those two television stations and whatever your parents expose you to?
Yeah, pretty much. And then, I did go to school. I wasn't homeschooled or anything. I was going to school. So there were kids there talking about Dire Straits or whatever was big. And then you'd listen. There was a radio, so I'd listen to the radio. So listen to the radio to listen to music, and my dad would be playing music, and VHS was starting to take off at the time. So my dad was a big sci-fi fan. So watching The Thing at way too young of an age, things like that. So that was sort of seeping in as well.
I mean, are there it doesn't have to be music, but is there anything that is particularly exciting your brain at this time or your heart? I don't know if you, I just assume for the baseline, everyone was as emotionally repressed as I was, but maybe that's not the case. And I would say probably as I'm saying this sentence, it is definitely not the case. But what is it that is like seeping into you? And because I'm trying to determine like what's pushing you in certain directions at this age.
I was into music, and like my dad would make me cassette tapes from his record collection, and then I would also listen to the radio. So that was about it. And I was into paper airplanes, making very advanced paper airplane sort of things. I thought I was going to be a pilot, but my eyesight's very, very bad. So when I realized I could never be a pilot because my eyesight's so bad, I kind of gave up on that.
Oh, what age were you?
10, maybe. I've been wearing glasses since I was 5.
Was that devastating, or was it something you just took in stride?
It was like, I guess I'm not going to do that. I won't be a astronaut or something. Move on to something else.
So it wasn't like a deeply held, because this is the stuff that I am fascinated by. The things that you want to be, the desires that you have, or the desires that maybe you don't know you have for what you want to do with your life. And then I've had, this always sticks in my brain, where I've had people on the show before who thought they were going to be athletes. And then in high school, they get some kind of injury that just ends that dream. And for them, it seems to be a very difficult thing to overcome, because that was such a deeply held existential desire for them.
I've never held on to something like that. So I never had any disappointments like that. I just kind of moved from one thing to another. It doesn't really bother me.
do you move from one thing to another in a way that, like, this is a dumb metaphor, but like a butterfly flies between flowers? Or is it more, and I mean that in a, like, there's a thing you want to do, you have a direction. Maybe if I make this less metaphorical.
It's amazing. Nobody's ever called me a butterfly before, and I feel very flattered, and I'm a little warm inside. That's amazing. Thank you.
There's a direction, there's a thing, but it's just like, oh, I'm going from flower to flower. Or is it more like meandering?
Okay, again, I'm not trying to be confrontational, and I know you already said maybe this isn't a perfect metaphor, but you don't think butterflies are meandering? Those are some of the most meandering flying creatures I can think of.
I think that they have a direction. Here's where I'll say meandering. Like, you've gone into a room to do something, but you forgot what you were there to do. You go on your phone for something specific and you forget what it is, and you just end up on Instagram. That to me is meandering in a way that at least a butterfly, whether it's conscious of this or not, has a thing that it is doing, right?
Yeah.
It is going to get pollen. And
no, I'm more meandering.
Okay.
I'm more of the Mitch Hedberg joke about if you get lost in a forest, fuck it, build a house. Now you live there.
So when you wanted to start making music, what was going on inside you where it went from, I'm always fascinated by this moment, and obviously it's a process, but I boil it down to a moment here of going from someone who just likes a thing to someone who is now making a thing. And then there's even another step where it's, I want to share this thing with other human beings. Like, what was that for you?
I think probably in 5th grade, I had a group of friends, and we all started getting into music so much, and then we all kind of got instruments at the same time. So there was a social reinforcement that was happening within the crew itself. So that, if I was to ask, where is the move between those 2 points, that would probably be a big part of it, because suddenly I had reinforcement. To one person had a guitar, one person had drums. We could play together. Hey, you're getting better. I better get better because you're getting better. And so we could play music. So that was a big, big step. Maybe not, we met in 5th grade, but maybe started playing music a little more in maybe freshman in high school. Mm-hmm. But those friends, before we started playing the instruments, we were friends that listened to music together and started to get excited about music together. And then it became less of a thing where I'm just hearing it from my father or the radio, and it becomes a social thing that becomes important, form a little clique, et cetera, et cetera.
Was there positive reinforcement coming from other people, or was it just you guys against the world? Yeah,
probably us against the world. I mean, my other friend named Matt, he also wore glasses. So we were sort of like 2 glasses guys. And when we went into junior high, it was pretty tough. Like I had pretty thick glasses. I was definitely me and Matt were 2 of the 3 nerds of junior high, like biggest, like get picked on and sort of thing. And so we listened to music as more of a secret thing. We didn't announce it. We weren't wearing patches. We hadn't figured out how to wrap that into our identity so that maybe we wouldn't be the biggest nerds in the world, even though we were listening to Motley Crue or very un-nerd-like music that you know, for junior high at the time. We hadn't really figured out how to present ourselves as music listeners at that time. As we went into high school, we started to figure it out. They got in heavy into skateboarding. I grew my hair long, got contacts. All of a sudden, we could present ourselves as, hey, I'm really into music. So that was a part of the movement as well.
Was that transformational for you in terms of not just obviously like, okay, I have long hair and I don't have these thick glasses anymore, so I present differently. But like, did you change inside? Because there are some people, I just will say that there's some people like you could change anything you want and they still feel the same inside.
that's the thing. I felt the same. That's why it was so interesting to see how differently I was treated as I moved from one to the other. I think I've always been fairly, let's face it, insufferable in certain ways. I have friends who told me stories about me in high school. I just got together with an old friend from high school a couple of years ago and told me some stories, and I was just shaking my head. I was like, oh my God, I was so terrible. Just pretentious, et cetera, et cetera. Not that I'm not now, but
But like in what way were you just like?
well, he told me this. He told me this great.
Greenaway is the funniest film.
No. He told me this great story. Apparently, when I was in high school, he came over to my house and I had taken down all my music posters and I had a completely blank room. And he said, "What's up? Where are all your posters?" And I guess I said, "You know what? I decided I'm going to stop putting all my energy into other people and only concentrate on myself." So terrible. Oh, I was like, oh my God, how did you hang out with me? That's so terrible. But it made me laugh.
Yeah. Yeah. But also, I will say this, in high school, when a lot of people do not have strong opinions about things or strong feelings about things, there is something very appealing about someone who, even if as you're categorizing it as pretentious or something like that, right? There is something very appealing about someone deciding like, well, you know what? I just don't have the energy for other people anymore. Like that seems cool to me in some way, even if it is a little.
Thanks. I think it's pretty funny. Yeah.
But was that the energy you were giving off in general, or was that just in certain moments that wafted off of you?
Probably all the time. I don't know. I don't know what I was. I when I think back, I think I was like I said, I was probably pretty insufferable up until probably 2 years ago.
Oh wait, what happened 2 years ago?
I don't know. I was just making a joke.
Was there something you were reacting to as you developed that way? In the same way that like earlier on when I was talking about like my brain has just created this hierarchy of art in my head that I'm reacting to culture and the way that certain things, I've been told that certain things are more important than others, and I've internalized it even if I don't intellectually believe it. There is still if I talk to someone on the show if I talk to David Harrington or Terry Riley, I am more meek than if I talk to Spiral Stairs. I don't know, right? That it just happens in my brain. And even though I love every one of those people the same, my brain has just created this thing. Were you reacting in some way towards like what was happening when you were younger where you developed that personality?
I don't know. I don't know where it came from. I feel so different now. That's why it's strange to think back. So maybe I'm not that different. I don't know. When I think back, I just think that I must have been pretty tough to deal with. I'd like to think that I'm more open now. I think of things that I've done in the past where I was so hardcore about something that should or should not happen based upon my views of art and music, and how now my views are more social, and that whatever happens for the good of a group is a lot better than for the good of what I perceive to be the absolute best or worst thing in art.
Is there a reason why you kind of evolved, or is it just that you've matured and you're just a different human being?
Yeah, I think just maturing, kind of. Yeah, maturing, maybe seeing other people like that a little bit, and sort of like, I don't know if you remember Sweet Pickles. But
no.
Sweet Pickles was I think I'm a little older than you, actually, probably. Sweet Pickles was a series for kids when I was a kid, and there were all these animals that lived in a town, and each animal had a personality trait. So like the nightingale was Nasty Nightingale. So the one book about Nightingale's just being terrible, and Fish was on a motorcycle, et cetera, et cetera. But there's one episode, and I can't remember the character, but the character throws a temper tantrum all the time to get what they want, until the rest of the animals all throw a temper tantrum to show the one animal how bad it is to do that. And the other animal's like, oh, that's ridiculous. That's how I feel about it.
I see. It was, for me, I got married I've been in a relationship with someone who hates my music, hates my musical tastes. We overlap a little bit. We overlap in a lot of other places, but when it comes to music, she absolutely does not like it. And I realized that the kind of strict beliefs that I held as a teenager into my 20s didn't matter.
Right.
Because if the person I love the most in the world absolutely does not give a shit about the music I like.
Right.
And I love her. And again, I'm saying this intellectually now. I'm like reconstructing it afterwards. But it was really just a softening where I'm like, yeah, you can the music, even the music where I was talking about earlier. And again, I said this off the cuff, so I don't know if I really stand by it, but like music made in a lab, I'm sure that does mean something to tens of millions of people. It really, I don't know if it really is as harmful. I say that, like, you know, I think one of the things that I saw as I grew up was how, when I was younger, I thought that culture was the thing that led the rest of the world. And the older I get, I realize that it's politics and power and money. Yeah. And that culture is always lagging behind it. So I don't have the same venom for whatever, Ariana Grande. I don't not that I ever did. I just don't give a shit. But like, I don't have the same venom for Bush, let's say, when I was a kid, that I do for Bush, for George W. Bush, for Cheney, for Biden, for any of these fuckers, right? And they're the ones that are doing the most damage to the earth, and not the people making like the shitty television show.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you on all of that.
Yeah, so I think that's the thing that really like changed for me, is that I became aware of how the world actually works, and that my opinions on whatever shitty action film, whatever, Fast and the Furious, that's not doing it. It's not really, it's not really doing anything dangerous in the world.
Yeah, I think another thing is that I've gone back to things that I didn't like at all and realized there was some value in there. And even something like Fast and the Furious, if there's probably a moment in time that's perfect thing to watch, you know, you want to zone out or something. It's not totally devoid of any value whatsoever.
Is there a thing that you have from your youth that you reviled that you have gone back and reevaluated and said, actually, there is something positive about this thing?
There probably is. I can't think of anything now, but there probably is something. Yeah. I mean, music wise, I remember really hating Talking Heads when I was a kid, thinking they were the worst band in the world. And then there's something just terrible when I was really young, 8 or 9 or whatever. I just didn't make it. I thought they were the worst band. My dad said that I used to run around and close all the windows to the house when he would play them because I didn't want the neighbors to hear it, even though the neighbors were so far away. But it was just so revealing. And then, of course, in high school or whatever, I loved that band. And still, they're one of my favorite bands. So, but that's younger.
Did your dad really enjoy living in the rural land, or was it a mistake?
Well, it was both. It was both because it was so hard to live. We got our water from the river, and there was no heater. All the heat was a wood stove. So these sorts of things really run you down after a while, especially when you're just working as a mechanic in this really cold, foggy weather all the time. And so he eventually moved into town when I was in high school, when I was about 15 or 16. But before that, our house, no cabinets. He built all the cabinets and everything. So after a while, it was a bit much for him. And the river flooded. So that river I was talking about was in our backyard. When my folks first saw the house, it was in the summertime and it was a little creek. But when wintertime comes around, they realized why there was a cement wall right behind the house, and it was to keep the river out. So there's this cement wall that the river got so high, if the cement wall wasn't there, the river would go right into the house. And there were enough moments where they thought the whole house was going to flood. That's another reason that they wanted to get out.
Oh, were you aware that was happening when you were younger, or did they hide that?
Yeah, because I didn't have to go to school. My partner's from Connecticut, and she always says, I can't believe you never had any snow days. It was one of the best days. And I said, I can't believe you didn't have any flood days, because I also did not have to go to school on a flood day.
Okay, I'm kind of curious. Do you grow up knowing that this is a atypical experience for America? Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm the one who's weird for growing up in the suburbs of a moderately sized city in Pennsylvania.
And as it was happening, I didn't even think I don't even know if I had a concept that there was anything outside, you know?
I just asked because I look for things on the show that kind of other people sometimes, because I do think this is not a universal or hard and fast rule, but I do think that to make interesting art, you have to have some little bit of otherness in you in some way that pries you apart from mainstream culture.
I'll have to think about that. I'll have to think about that.
And I'm curious because you saying this stuff to me seems atypical, but then again, I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe this is the experience of millions and millions of Americans, and that I'm the strange one for, my evenings being hanging out in the Blockbuster parking lot eating Crazy Bread.
Yeah. I don't know. It's hard to tell because we weren't that far away from the big city, only like 25 minutes. And when I say big city, I mean Eureka, which is a small town, but to us it was the big city. Biggest city is San Francisco, which is a 6-hour drive, but south. But we weren't that far away from town. And we'd go into town every day. That's where the school was, in town. So although my home was out in the country, there was normal town sort of things happening. So I never felt like anything was too strange living out there in the country with the floods and everything, because nobody else seemed to think it was strange for the area in general.
Right. By the way, when we say normal, I want the listeners to know this is all quotes, right? We're not saying there's any kind of, but I guess this is the thing where in media, your childhood is not really depicted. Or if it is, it's depicted like Little House on the Prairie. It's depicted as a
what's funny,
1800s type thing.
That's what it seems like. But with the bikes and the gangs and everything, it was a lot closer to a Spielberg movie. So Spielberg movies, like when I watch E.T., that feels with the D&D and the bikes, and that feels like that they really nailed what was going on. And whether or not we sort of modeled our behavior on those movies as well, with the bikes and Us Against the World, et cetera, it feels a lot closer. When I watch Little House on the Prairie, I don't really feel anything, but when those Spielberg movies, Goonies, then I think, that really was what my growing up was. We were pretty rural. There's only a few friends. But in terms of culture and how things felt, it was very much like those movies.
Okay. That's so interesting. Okay. Well, then, at what point does your life start to move in a direction of, I'm going to make music for real, as opposed to like, hey, it's my friends and we're just playing in a punk band and we're having fun?
I don't even know if I really ever... one thing just moved so much into another. I mean, I was kind of in punk bands and I dropped out because I started getting into folk music, and nobody was really into that at the time around here. So I didn't really have any friends. I had a couple friends who would say, oh, that's pretty cool, but nobody that would wanted to dive into it the way I did. So that's when I really focused on acoustic guitar. That's when I started to sort of develop what became Six Organs. But even then, Six Organs was around for 4 or 5 years before I ever really... I guess the moment would be when I quit my job at the record store in Santa Cruz. And this isn't until I was about 26 or 27. Quit the job and decided that I'm just going to tour. And if I need money, I'll go on tour. That was probably the defining moment. Did
you have a want at that time? Did you have something that you were interested in pursuing? Like... I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, are you just like, you know what, I'm enjoying life. I work at this record store. I play music on the side. Like, what was going on internally?
Well, I don't know if I ever considered it playing music on the side of the record store either. It was all one thing, especially since the record store is a community of musicians as well. So when I say that was the break, it was only because I realized I had to consistently be on tour to survive. That was going to be my life, which pretty much how things worked out until lockdown a little bit when I couldn't. But so that was like a moment. But even then, 4 or 5 years after that, I don't feel that I was that different than when I was living in Santa Cruz and working at the record store either. That wasn't even that much of a break. That was just in terms of when did you decide that you were going to do this as a living.
Mm-hmm.
But so I don't think...
It was really external.
Yeah, it was external. There's nothing internally. It was just the same as even when I first started the band. Nothing feels that different.
That's so interesting. Was there a point where you made that internal decision, or was it just that you were, well, I like this. This feels good to me, or I find this to be meaningful or important or whatever, right? You kind of just like slid into that feeling
Of wanting to go on tour?
of meaning, of like, this is meaningful to me in a way that I want to keep making it.
You mean music? Well, that would be way earlier. That would be when I started to, well, I don't know. I don't think there was one moment. It's all very gradual. There was
Right.
just this accumulation of meaning, I would say.
Do you remember the critical mass though? Do you remember like that final straw where it tipped over?
No, because there were just little incremental things that would happen, and they were all social. It would be doing something and having one person say something nice that reinforced on a more sociological side of things, where you get the reinforcement, and so you decide to continue to pursue a certain thing. If every single person told me that I was terrible and I needed to stop playing guitar immediately, then I probably still would have played, just not for anybody else, just gone in the room or something. But when you get the reinforcement, then you think, well, maybe I could play for a few more people. And I need to emphasize this was not a lot, because this music is not popular at all. But one or two people that I really admire, if they say something nice, then I continue.
Interesting. So, because I'm just trying to figure out what's the development for this becoming, for music becoming who you are in a certain sense. I know that's reductive, but like,
Well,
is there a point where you were like, oh, this is it?
I think that's when I first started playing music in high school.
Oh, really?
That's if you're just thinking in terms of identity, that's when I started to identify as someone who played music. I mean, I wasn't doing it professionally or making any money or anything, but that was my identity.
Were you someone who could be emotive outside of music, or was music your primary pathway to emotion?
I think it would even be questionable if my music is a pathway to emotion. I have actually been trying to become as cyborg as possible in a lot of ways. Just because I go back to what I said earlier. I think people fall back on the idea that emotion is the most important thing in music. And so I like to just question whether or not that's true. I'm not saying it's not true. I think there is emotion in music. I mean, you can go back to Homer's Odyssey, and Penelope, there's a musician there, and Penelope says, "Hey, quit playing that shit. It's making me really sad." I mean, these are ideas that have lasted a long time. So, but I just don't believe that we should automatically assume that that's the most important thing with music without questioning it.
Yes. I think you're right. I think there is an involuntary part of it, though, that you can't help sometimes. And this is not blanket statement. This is not universal, but I think there's a lot of it where it pulls something out of you that you didn't want it to. Like Penelope saying, "Stop playing that. It's making me sad." She didn't want to be sad. It just did that to her. And not all music does, but even like I said, like, I don't know, the weirdest piece of modern composition can grab something in me and pull it out, even if I didn't want it to, or even I didn't think it was going to. In the same way that I think a lot of music can also pull out intellectual things.
I agree. I think if we choose to focus on emotion in music, I think we're going to work ourselves into a corner in a lot of ways when it comes to the politics of music, and especially the economics of music, in that we can already see how algorithms are trying to tap into your emotions. Mm-hmm. What do you feel? And if the musician only interfaces, and if the listener only interfaces in terms of emotion, then you will be trapped. I feel we need to find something else as well, or it's already there. We don't need to find it. Just explore the other ideas about why music might be important on an aesthetic level, beyond emotion, why it should exist. Because a lot of times when you talk about it only on emotional level, it also becomes this It becomes this thing where it needs to be used on an emotional level, and it becomes a resource. Then music becomes a resource, and that's another danger. When you only think about it, then music only has one resource. I'm sad. I'm going to listen to sad music. I'm going to use this music as a resource. Or I'm happy, or maybe the other way. I'm sad. I want to listen to happy music to reverse this. Again, I'm not saying this doesn't happen, but if that's the only way that we think about music without questioning other things, we will find ourselves trapped.
Was there something that happened? Was this just a view that you kind of stumbled upon, or was there something you saw where you're like, oh, this is starting to not make sense anymore, and I want to kind of expand our understanding of what this means, what music means?
When you hear the same thing over and over and over again, then you just have to question it. Like, why is everyone saying the same thing? Is it because is absolute truth here? Or are there other things? Are people just saying it because it's so easy to say over and over again without thinking about the importance of music, or like different things that music can be? It's so easy to just say that. I think some of it is in music criticism, reading music criticism and seeing certain ideas just be repeated. So when you see that for years and years, then you start to, when you hear other people say the same thing over and over, you think, well, maybe they're just repeating something. It's the same thing as when an artist writes a one sheet and then somebody writes a review and it's just the one sheet. They didn't think about anything. So it's the same thing when people talk about music and again, I'm not saying, because I need to emphasize this, that music, it does not have anything to do with emotion.
Right.
I just think it would benefit everybody to think about other ways in which music can be listened to besides that.
I think for me, why I hit it so hard is because I spent decade not really emotionally interacting with music.
Right. Okay.
And so as an adult, where I actually do acknowledge my emotions and I can understand them in a nuanced way, thanks mostly to therapy and lots of other things.
Right.
That it is like, that's why I start to default to that, even though I did mostly interact with music on a very intellectual level, not on a bodily level for so long.
Right. And again, I'm not saying, I think that's beautiful. I think that's awesome. I just think that there's other ways I think that we feel music in ways beyond emotions.
Yeah.
That need to sometimes be explored a little more, such as time. People take it for granted that music is an artwork that relies on time in order to exist, but how does it make you feel about time? It can make me feel something about time instead of feeling an emotion. I can feel time in a certain way. I'm not calculating time. Time doesn't become segmented, and please, I'm afraid you're going to bring up Bergson now if you're talking about emotion and time, because I know a little bit about but you could do that, or you can feel time. You can feel time in music without even feeling an emotion. So there's something that you can experience through music that doesn't have anything to do with emotion.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's true. And it's something that I tend to de-emphasize, right? But there are certain artworks, there's certain music where I don't even know how to say this right. I'll just blurt out whatever nonsense is in my head and maybe we can figure out something a little more coherent from it. But like, it subsumes you into the flow of existence in a way, and that I wouldn't call that an emotional state. I would call it puts you in a certain mode of being, let's say, that otherwise you wouldn't be in without that artwork enveloping you. Am I saying it in any way that's
absolutely
coherent?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And then I think one of the things about emotion in music as well is it's hard because emotions are such a flowing form. You don't have, to bring up Bergson, you're not happy and then there's an immediate cutoff and then you are another type of happy. And then, so how do you even map an emotion onto music if you were specifically going to do that? So that's another thing to think about.
I will say that, like, if you monitor your internal state when a certain piece of music is playing, you can at least look at the changes that are going on within you at that moment, right?
That's interesting. So if you're monitoring yourself, are you fully in the music itself?
No, you are not immersed at that point. No. But there's some I can't. Well, that's not true. I was about to say I can't get out of that analytic mode of being, but that's not true. If a piece of art, whatever it is, doesn't have to be music in this case, really grabs me, then again, I'm subsumed into the flow of existence and I'm not monitoring. I'm not sitting there with my little Freudian cap on, kind of like stroking my stubble, being like, interesting. Yeah, so you're right. There are moments, okay, like sometimes, you know what it is? It's dialectical then, right? Because there are moments, even when you are subsumed, there are moments where you fall out of the flow and you start to monitor and then you go back into the flow, right?
You have to abstract it. You pull it out a little bit and it becomes an abstraction from the music itself. I think that's why there's a little bit, and I'm hammering this too much. Like, this isn't something I'm constantly thinking about, but just in terms of emotion and music, I just feel like we should let music be music. That sounds like a very trite sort of thing to say, but I think that there's a thing about just letting music be music and not abstracting emotion or abstracting anything from it.
I think I understand what you're saying. It is like to say that let music be music, even though it is what's the word? I forget now, but there's some logical thing that is.
Okay. Yeah. And again, it's a bit of a pushback against thinking of music as a resource as well. When we think of, you don't cut down the rainforest because we need it for oxygen. No, don't cut down the rainforest because it's rainforest. We don't need to think of it as a resource in order to do the right thing.
Yes. Okay. So, I mean, we're right at the end. I'm just curious, how did this understanding of music as a thing in itself, right? How did this evolve for you?
I don't know. I don't know where other points are. It seems just, I don't know. I don't know where this, I don't know. I don't even know when I started thinking this. It just, like I said, it's from hearing kind of the same thing over and over again and then just questioning it. Well, is that true? Maybe we should think about this for a little bit. That plus seeing how music was starting to be considered a resource for emotion,
right?
By big business,
right? Then, by the way, the word is tautology. It just came into my head.
Oh, right. Something is something. Right.
But I think what's really interesting about that though is that your relationship with the art of making music, as opposed to like the commercial. Again, going back to the very beginning of this kind of weird hierarchy that's not real, but that my brain internalized from culture. It internalized it from a capitalist culture that commodifies music, like you said, as a resource. And I know I have this kind of like dual understanding where like that is in my head and it does affect how I feel about certain things. And I also intellectually know that it's bullshit, that that's false, and that the way that you are discussing it, even, I say tautologically, but really it's let music be music. And that second music is italicized. That second word is italicized. And so it really isn't a tautology. There is something deeper in that sentence that you are saying. I have those two things in my head that are constantly conflicting. But it is this capitalist. It is existing in a totalized capitalist world, or a capitalist world that has become totalized and that infects every quark and molecule of existence.
Yeah. I should also say that I'm not sitting here in deep listening 100% of the time, or never listening to music as a resource myself, or never listening to music with any emotion. I'm just questioning those things, and I think it's good to question those things.
Yeah, 100%. And you can also, like, not to like make this pat, but like you do, like, in talking about your teenage years, you do see the seeds of this in a kind of like oppositional way that you regarded music in that stage of your development. Like that's preserved in a more mature way now as an adult.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Ben, I can't say enough how much this meant to talk to you. Thank you so much. I've been listening to your music for a long, long time, and it means a lot, both emotionally and intellectually, and in every other dimension.
Thank you very much. It's been a blast having a conversation with you. Thank you for having me on. Awesome.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome.
This was a real delight. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.